Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you know by now, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, I'm the principal attorney of the Kulkarni Law Firm. I advise companies with FDA regulated products. So if you have a think about drugs, a wonder about medical devices, consider cannabis, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. I have these discussions, a lot of fun. I like always learning something new, and today's podcast is going to be no different. So if you like learning something new, please leave a comment, please subscribe. It lets me know you're listening. It lets the guests know you're listening, and you can always reach me on Twitter at Darshan Talks. Go to my website at darshantalks.com. Our guests, where can they reach you, Ray?
Sure. I mean, I could probably be reached best at LinkedIn or Twitter. So on Twitter, I'm Health Unchained without the E at the end. And then on LinkedIn, you can find me Ray Dogum pretty easily
There you
this
go.
way. And you can also
So
go to my website, healthunchained.org, and complete that contact us form if you want to do that as well.
there you go. So today's podcast is going to be interesting because it's two podcast hosts talking about what's worked for us, what's not worked for us, and why we think that there's actually some similarity, some crossover, and how that's been. So if you are in marketing and you're wondering, should you start your own podcast? If you are in clinical research and you're going, is blockchain really a thing I should care about? If you are in regulatory and you're worried about your inspections and whether the regulators are going to see what you did, today's podcast is going to be really quite interesting for you. Our guest today is, as he pointed out a few seconds ago, the host of the Health Unchained podcast, and that's really exciting. He's actually changed jobs recently, so it's all very hush hush. It's very very quiet, but he is a man extraordinaire. He is the guy who actually reached out, and he has actually been really helpful in me talking to some really interesting people. So what better way to actually have today's podcast than by talking to him, to the man himself, Ray Dogum. Hey Ray, how are you?
Darshan, thank you so much. That was quite the introduction. I appreciate it. Um,
Nope.
so yeah, I mean, I found out about your podcast, and I just found it fascinating how many actual episodes you've been publishing every like day almost. So I just thought that was awesome. It's a lot of work doing podcasts, as you know. So just thank you for sharing all you're doing with the community. I think it's important.
I have a great time. I get to learn. I get to talk to interesting people like yourself. But sort of what started this for you? Like for me, it was just
Yeah.
pure interest and boredom.
No, definitely. So a bit of a background about myself. I do have a chemical engineering degree. I went to business school, so I got a master's in MBA basically, and an MS in information systems. And at a certain point, I guess I was always sort of interested in blockchain technology ever since like probably 2013 when Bitcoin started getting popular and Ethereum came out. So I always kept that on the periphery, like what looking out for updates on blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. And during my MBA, my focus was primarily on the healthcare industry. So
Mhm.
I was looking at how the health sector operates, all the dysfunctions of the U.S. health system, as well as internationally, how a lot of incentives are just they're misincentives really for populations, governments, and people. And what I realized was blockchain was theoretically a perfect solution for many of the issues that I saw in healthcare. So things like price transparency for drugs that can be made better using blockchain, accessibility for providers. You can do that also with telehealth, as well as improving some of the function behind it with blockchain. You could talk about how organizations share data, which is a primary benefit of using blockchain technology. If you have a group of pharmaceutical companies, for example, and let's say they are working to um, trade some data across them. So let's talk about clinical trials for as an example. Clinical trials, a lot of times the data that is generated in clinical trials is not shared amongst the different parties that might want to know about them because pharmaceutical companies want to keep that sort of to themselves. However, if you introduce a decentralized sort of way of sharing scientific information, data, and research, you would be able to more quickly sort of um, gather that information and gain more insights so that it can be shared across different parties. I think that's, one of the promises of blockchain. So really, long story short, I realized no one was really talking about this about 3 years ago, and there were a few companies, a few startups in the healthcare blockchain space. I reached out to them. I said, "Hey, would you be interested in talking to me on like a podcast?" A couple of them said yes. I said, "Okay, I gotta come up with a cool name and start the podcast." And I've been doing it for, almost 3 years now.
Yeah, but let's talk about some of these solutions because I think it's
Yeah.
kind of interesting, right? Let's sort of position it in the perspective of what happened in today's news, which was Bitcoin got a huge unboost. Is that I don't know if that's the right word, but Elon Musk comes out and says that, you know what, I'm not gonna accept Bitcoin because the health the environmental cost is too high. Um, my question to you is: have you, in the 3 years that you've been following this, and blockchain itself is a little bit older, but nevertheless, it's not that much older. So in the time that you've been following it, have you seen this type of sudden de-escalation, if you will, and what caused it, and will Bitcoin survive?
It's a great question. So I have seen many times when Bitcoin was declared dead. I do think that it will survive this time around as well. And there's a few things about this today's like announcement by Tesla that they won't be accepting Bitcoin anymore. If you look at some of the news articles, it does say that Tesla won't be selling their Bitcoin that they have now. They are just going to wait until mining becomes more energy efficient. So it's not like they've given up all faith on Bitcoin. I think
Mhm.
there is still value in that network and really the community. So yeah, so all the times that Bitcoin was declared dead, it returned, and as you see now, it's like what $50,000 per Bitcoin,
Yeah,
which is
ridiculous.
ridiculous.
I had it at 1,000. It's ridiculous. I hate myself right now. But ignoring that part of it. But the thing is, when mining becomes more energy efficient, the goal of Bitcoin was that it becomes more inefficient as it goes along. That was the entire point. So I'm not sure that the mining will become more efficient. However, I have a question about the second part of that same announcement, where he said that I think I'm going to put my efforts to some of the other coins that have more value, if you will, that are more energy efficient. Do you see that as him sort of diverting the energy, diverting the conversations? Specifically, I think what he's thinking of is Dogecoin. He's talked about it a lot, though he did call it a hype coin on Saturday Night Live a few days ago. So, what's your take on that?
Yeah, that's right. I believe he called it a hustle.
A
Um,
hustle.
so, I mean, there are going to be a world of cryptocurrencies as we get into this new decentralized space. I don't know the future. Like I can't tell you what's going to happen for sure. I do think that if people start to believe Dogecoin has value, it will continue to have value. Some of the things that concern me is I know the code base hasn't been updated for years. I think like 40% of all Dogecoin are owned by like 10 or 20 wallets or something. So I think there are concerns about the network security in that way.
Yeah.
Um, but again, like money is just a shared imagination that we all have as human beings. It's a
Yeah.
intersubjective imagination that we all kind of share. Um, and the same goes for fiat currency in a way. Just the difference with fiat currency is there is a whole army backing it. So the taxes are collected in that form. So there's just more belief in it because that's how it is. But things can change, especially in this day and age.
Absolutely.
Things are changing very fast, and I'm looking forward to just following it all and trying to report on it like you.
For sure. So let's talk about some of these other perfect solutions you talked about. You talked about price transparency in the context of healthcare. So talk to me a little bit more about what you had in mind when you said that. Is
Yeah.
Bitcoin that format, or is it just any coin? And you were talking about distributed ledger technologies in general, and does it matter?
Well, I was specifically more talking about drug price transparency.
Sure.
So between like hospitals and
Sure.
manufacturers, wholesalers, and there's a one consortia that has been getting some gaining some steam is Mediledger, and what they're doing is to It's a consortia that has multiple pharma and infrastructure companies that are trying to build a system where I think their original or their main focus right now is on chargebacks and a few other things as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just refer people to go to Mediledger, go to
But
their website for more information.
what's the incentive to do price transparency using a DLT? What's the goal?
Well, one is there is a law, actually, DSCSA,
Sure.
drug supply
PSA.
chain security. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that is one incentive that people are trying to comply with. Another is just the fact that there's a lot of manual work that is done right now in order to fill in the gaps when you are working with other companies. If you have a contract with certain organizations, and they will basically need to have Excel files or spreadsheets sent back and forth to adjudicate certain claims or adjudicate certain refunds for drugs, or
Yeah.
there's a lot of different contracts that can be built into the blockchain in a way that is more automated and doesn't require like human intervention in many cases.
But you talk about how I mean, it's obviously more efficient in that the data will be on there. But the truth is that a lot of the data will actually be off ledger. It'll
Mhm.
actually be stored off ledger. So you might know that there is data, but the data itself will point to something off the ledger, which means that you're still going to have to exchange those Excel spreadsheets. All you know is that there's a date that confirms that something happened on that date. Am I missing something, or?
No, that's right. So what you're saying is that since there's like a timestamp of that file or data being entered, no one can go in later and alter it because
Right.
it's already been timestamped and verified. And that is, one of the major benefits. Um,
But I can actually alter the data, though. It's not that. So the timestamp I cannot alter, but I could
right, but if
theoretically.
you alter the data,
Mhm.
it would be you would have to append the blockchain in
No,
order
no,
to
I
do.
get that. I'm sorry. I should
Uh,
have clarified. Unless you put literally all the data onto the blockchain, which would be really inefficient, because there's just too much data there. You'd have to store it off the chain and point on the chain saying I have data off of it, like an NFT or the like. So if that's true, I always, using that logic, I would be able to still alter the data because it's off chain, and there's nothing that would trigger anything on the chain because I altered it. Am I missing something?
so I think when you go to alter that offline, it does
Uh-huh.
trigger something.
So that's how it'd be set.
Uh, yeah, it would.
Okay. Okay,
Or it
that's
should be built that way at least.
fair enough. Fair enough. So the idea would be that we would, pharma, for example, in this specific situation, would be able to go, oh, there's data off the chain, or there's data available, and we don't have to keep sending spreadsheets back and forth. Um, but that's going to allow me to, in the case of chargebacks, to know when the data was submitted, and therefore can get the data back in time, and therefore potentially payments will be on time, I guess, and potentially more accurate. Is that?
Yes, so it would definitely reduce the amount of delay there is between those communications and reconciliations, really. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a benefit and one of the value propositions that these organizations are reaching for. So that's definitely one of them.
But why go down the Mediledger route? Why not just use like a Bitcoin, if you will, or something else, Dogecoin or whatever it is?
Well, I think there's a lot of like user interface work that needs to get done, and like the logic behind those business contracts need to be developed.
Uh,
And I believe Mediledger actually uses I think they do use Ethereum to some degree, I believe.
okay.
So I would check out the chronicled white paper.
Okay.
And again, I'm not like a Mediledger expert or anything. That was
Sure.
just one example I just wanted to throw out
I
there
thought it was
because
interesting. No, it's
there was a
interesting.
webinar today on it, so that's why I attended. And yeah.
No, it just sounds like a fascinating concept, and you just happen to know more about it than I did right now. So I
Yeah.
just thought it was fascinating. Um, do do you? So let's talk about the next one, which is accessibility. You talked about it. The data will be more accessible using blockchain, but one of the things we both know is that there is a great reason for pharma to not make the data accessible because their entire intellectual property is that data. Do you think that it's a solution in need of a problem?
So is what a solution need a problem
So,
like
so I'm
what?
sorry. I'm sorry. Let's take an example. Let's say you've discovered something interesting, right? And you've sort of gone, okay, this could be really interesting. I should put it onto the blockchain because it increases accessibility and potentially increases transparency. Um, I can totally see you're right. It
So I
doesn't.
just want to
Right.
clarify
Okay,
on
that's where I got it
accessibility.
wrong.
I just
Yeah.
want to say what I was thinking was the ability for like a patient, like thinking about in the future,
Oh,
a patient being able to have their own data or own their own data so they can share it with the providers that they want to. So
that's
it's
what you
less
meant. Okay,
accessibility in that sense. It's more, I guess, interoperability or
got it.
accessibility to providers of their choosing.
Okay, I had a totally different case study when I was thinking about that. I was like, that doesn't. I'm not sure how that would work, but quite honestly, you explained how that would work in price transparency. So I was just going to learn something new. So what you're saying is what um what blockchain might be able to do is allow for patients to carry their data from one place to the other without having to be tied to silos within systems, and that's the big takeaway. Um, Obviously, the risk of hacking becomes quite huge at that point. So, talk to me a little bit more about what you've discovered around the security of things like blockchain or other DLTs.
Well, I mean, if you consider hacking or malware issues like that, it's more dangerous to have one company owning all the accounts for thousands or millions of different patients. So I would say like having a hospital with a centralized database containing hundreds of thousands of patients' information, that is more of a honeypot than if they were to try to hack individual patient accounts or individual patient wallets, let's say, like decentralized wallets, because they would only be able to do that one at a time unless they crack the encryption code.
That's what I meant, though. Isn't there a huge incentive to try to crack the encryption code at that point?
There is, but I think if they did crack the encryption code, it's going to affect not just them or their wallets. It's going to affect everything, like people's
Right.
bank accounts, uh,
Okay. Okay.
nuclear missile.
So it's that significant that the type of encryption
Yeah, if you're
is
talking about like SHA-256, that's a very secure protocol,
right.
and yeah, it
So
would take
so
a lot to break it. And if they did, we
okay.
have a lot of other
Yep.
problems on our hands. Yeah.
Got it. Um.
And
So
for
so
those that aren't aware of the industry too much, Andreas Antonopoulos explains this really well. So if you're concerned about encryption on blockchain, I would do some research on him.
Andreas
Antonopoulos.
Antonopoulos.
Yeah. He's sort of viewed as one of the gurus of blockchain, specifically Bitcoin.
Have you actually spoken to him as well? Interviewed him?
Not on my show, but I actually met him once at MIT back in like 2014, I think, when he came to give a talk, and it was for a group of students, like open session,
Yeah.
open lecture, and he gave away a bunch of his books for free. So I think like 30 people got his books or something like that. So real nice guy. Um, yeah, very knowledgeable.
So I mean, this is so fascinating, and we've talked about data sharing and clinicaltrials.gov before. So you're right. There's loads of opportunities to talk about these sort of use cases that are still developing. Do you know much about where they are in the development stage?
So it varies. It really does vary. Some claim that they have production level software working and people are starting to use them on the blockchain. Uh, I don't know how advanced they all are. I feel like we're still in the experimental phase right now. I mean, it's great that we've made so much progress in just a few years, but we're not at the level of like eBay or Facebook or Amazon. I think there's still time to get to that Web 3.0 experience. And when I say
Yeah.
Web 3.0, it's kind of like a more dynamic experience for the user, individual user, and they kind of have ownership over the data while they're traveling across the web. So It will happen. I do think that it will happen. I'm very confident in that. But when, I would say maybe 3 to 5 years is kind of like my horizon.
Okay.
Um, but it could happen sooner. I mean, I think there's a lot of catalyst that COVID-19 brought to the like industry, where people are now, working from home. Everyone's doing things digitally. So there is this like catalyst for a more digitized experience in general. And we'll see. Politically speaking, there's also a lot of issues that have come up that blockchain could potentially help to solve.
Such
One
as?
thought that comes like just voting in general. But before we get there, we have to figure out the problem of identity and how we can determine um, our digital identity and how to do that securely and how we can trust it. So a lot of people are working in that field as well. Yeah, it's a growing world, and I feel like we're still in the early stages of it. But wow, I think it's just really interesting.
So do you see the horizon for actual blockchain use? I feel like right now, like you said, it's the early stages. Where is blockchain wholesale use a 5-year horizon, a 10-year horizon? When should we expect that will be impacted?
That's a tough question. I don't know how to answer that fully, but I would expect within 10 years for sure, like we would have everyone would be it would be like a requirement for most cases that either your identity is decentralized, and in order to get to places you'll have to prove um, that you have to prove your identity through a decentralized method. Um, it's hard to say. I will say that if you think about how the internet developed and what the internet really is, right? If we think about what the internet is, it's just a way for people and machines to exchange content and information. That's
Yeah.
really all it is. Even if you consider banking, banking is not a way to. When I send you a Venmo, when I send you money through Venmo, it's not like I'm sending you real value through it. I'm using the banks as a proxy and using Venmo and like 3 other intermediaries in order to send that digital money over to you. But when you introduce blockchain into the world, it's actually adding another layer, and I would call it the layer of the exchange of value. So instead of exchanging content and information, now we're exchanging true value that cannot be copied or replicated. So, you know, that's an important thing to think about.
I can see that.
So and one thing that is valuable too is our time. Like right now, your time and my time, it's valuable. And
Mhm.
moving forward, I think we'll be able to better measure how much our time is worth, and also get um, sort of tokenize it in a way that blockchain can facilitate more efficient transactions between different parties.
Oh, that's a really interesting use case. So it blockchain might actually end up doing not might not just be a storage of information. It may be a arbitrator of value, if you will, and therefore connection associated with that.
Agreed. Yep, that's how I feel.
Fascinating. So let me ask you this, and I know we're butting up against the timeline that we had originally set. So
No worries.
let's ask a couple of questions. So talk to me about Health Unchained. So what is the incentive? What is the goal of Health Unchained? And why restrict yourself to health? Like you just pointed out, there's so many use cases outside health.
Fair question. Yeah. So there are, but there's also dozens, if not hundreds, of other podcasts that are doing things around cryptocurrency or blockchain. I think there's a couple that are specifically talking about how blockchain can impact like the regulatory world. So that might be something that you would be interested
Yeah,
in. So I decided to focus on a small subset of that.
yeah.
I've been passionate in healthcare for a while now. I actually um, dreamed of becoming a doctor at some point, but changed courses and went into the business world instead,
A lot of
which
doctors would
I,
agree with
I'm
you.
I'm happy with that decision. Um, but yeah, that's really the main reason why. And I think
Okay.
it's the most important thing. If you think about existence, what's more important than your health? Do I really want to be talking about how much more money you can make by investing in X, Y, and Z? I didn't really want to do that. I think it's more important to talk about the issues that affect people's lives, health, and you know, and death too. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of people talking about longevity and
Mhm.
aging and how we can prevent aging. So
Yeah.
Is it possible that we'll live forever? I don't really think so, at least not in my lifetime. It would be kind of cool, but there are people trying to find ways of transferring like your brain or your consciousness into a different digital form. So how would that work? Do we need a blockchain for that? Can I trust anyone? Do I want people to give, or do I want someone to be able to copy multiple instances of my consciousness and tweak it? And so
Yeah.
really like far-fetched questions and ideas, but if someone were to say, what's the internet in like 1980, 1970, it's kind of far-fetched for them to think about how we live today. So yeah,
Yeah.
long-winded
So
answer, but
so 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 you're seeing the blockchain as literally the building blocks of what tomorrow's going to look like. So I find that to be fascinating. Um, so let me ask you a question. What is a question you'd like to ask our audience based on our conversation?
I would like to ask them what are some of their major pain points when they deal with the healthcare system, because I
Mm,
think it's going to be important for these technologists, professionals that are working in healthcare and blockchain to understand what the most problematic issue is for them, because that's the thing that we want to solve. We want to try to first go for that low hanging fruit, and then see what happens. I think it'll be an experiment, but as we learn more and as people share their issues, I think that'll be helpful for the whole community.
very, very cool. Let me ask you a couple more questions. These are the rapid fire. What challenges you?
What challenges me? Coordinating meetings sometimes.
No,
Just
that's my
times.
challenge. That was my fault.
Um,
And good.
no, but I think like this challenge is really significant because healthcare itself is a complicated space. You know,
Yeah,
it deals with a lot of regulation. Not to say that it's bad, but that's something that has to be considered. You're talking about people's health and life, so you really want to make sure what you're implementing is going to help and not hurt. So there's not a lot of room for trial and error in that space necessarily.
yeah.
As opposed to other consumer apps and things like no one's going to get hurt if your Clubhouse app fails, but if something in healthcare fails, people can get hurt. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what is the best part of having your own podcast?
Talking to all these cool people that are way smarter than me and
Right.
learning. And it's just fun because you get people reaching out to you, asking you questions, and it's just a good experience. I love the community. It's so good.
I 100% agree. So I'm going to do a quick recap. Tell me if I miss anything. But
Yep.
during this podcast, we landed up talking about just some of the opportunities that exist. As you've called it, the perfect solution. There's price transparency using things like Mediledger. There's accessibility. There's data sharing. There's clinical trials. You talked a little bit about your own background. You talked about being a chemical engineer and MS in information system, having your MBA. You talked about misincentives, which we didn't get a chance to jump into, but love to talk about that pretty soon. You talked about mining and sort of how Tesla has been addressing that, and the idea that they might go back to Bitcoin if it becomes more efficient. You talked about the Chronicled and Andres Antonopoulos. So it's sort of been an interesting talk. Did I miss anything?
I think you covered it well. Yeah, no, I appreciate the conversation too. It's always a pleasure.
This was wonderful. Thank you. Great to
Thank
have
you.
you on again. Oh, by the way, how can they reach you again?
Yeah, you can check me out on Twitter, Health Unchained, and check out my website, healthunchained.org. Also on LinkedIn. And if you're really interested, there's a Telegram community that you can join for Health Unchained, where got like a bunch of guests and just the community asking questions, sharing things on a daily basis. So it's the best way to be engaged.
Telegram and not Clubhouse.
Yeah, Telegram. Clubhouse, I just started getting into, but not quite there yet.
Fair, fair enough. Again, thank you for coming on. Nothing in this podcast should be construed as legal or clinical advice of any kind. It's also not information systems advice. It's intended for educational entertainment purposes only. For those of you who missed it, you can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter or go to our website at darshantalks.com. If you like this podcast, please leave a comment, please subscribe. But most of all, thank you, Ray, for coming on because that was a lot of fun.
Really appreciate it, Darshan. Anytime. Thanks.